And now we're going to go from New York to England, to the United Kingdom. We have as our next guest, Kenneth Woods. And Kenneth is joining me. He is the artistic director of the English Symphony Orchestra, the Colorado Mahler Fest, and the Edgar Festival. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Morten. It's great to be here. Thanks for making time to talk to us.
You have a very special project, very apropos to what we've been talking about, bringing Mahler to the world in times of COVID. Tell us a little bit about your project. It's called Visions of Childhood, Following Mahler on the Path to Eternity.
This is a project that started pre-COVID in 2017. The ESO was getting ready to do a performance of the Erwin Stein arrangement of Mahler 4. And that's always a tricky piece to program because on the one hand, part of the beauty of that arrangement is its economy of means, but there's very little else written for that same instrumentation. So after struggling for a little while, I thought, well, maybe the solution here is just to pick what would be the perfect pieces to go with Mahler 4 and make them for the same instrumentation as the Stein, which of course is not the original instrumentation Mahler himself used. So that program was very similar to the one that ESO is doing this month, with one exception. We started the program with Schoenberg's arrangement of the Emperor Waltz, which has now been replaced with my own arrangement of the Siegfried Idyll. In the piece, it all fit together really beautifully, and I revisited the program back in December with the view to thinking past what would have been Mahler Fest this year, where we would have done the second symphony, to Mahler Fest 21, where we were going to do the third symphony. And what does one do with the third symphony? And of course, the Mahler aficionados and fanatics here will know that Das himmlische Leben, the finale of Mahler 4, was originally supposed to be the finale of Mahler 3. And there's all sorts of thematic links between the two works. And so it did seem like perhaps the idea of doing both of those symphonies at the same festival might be a little extreme, but could we just do Das himmlische Leben as a sort of prelude? Because of course, when he wrote Das himmlische Leben, first of all, he didn't know it was going to be in a symphony, let alone in two symphonies. And over a sort of 8-year period, he worked with the ideas in that song until he'd written 2 huge symphonies and finally found its permanent home. So the format of this concert is really that idea of trying to look at Das himmlische Leben itself as a focal point and draw out all the themes and connections that Mahler may have been thinking about.
Okay, this is you've provided us with some material I really want to share with our audience. Let's just see that segment from Das himmlische Leben in your arrangement based on the Stein or instrumentation. Just wonderful, just a wonderful performance and arrangement. And you know, kein Musik ist ja auf Erden mit unseren verglichen kann werden. And you know, that just captures so much, I think, of what Mahler is trying to do here. Are we following Mahler to eternity? Does he take us there?
Well, I think he does, yeah. I mean, it's one of his tropes, and I would say of his major symphonic works, at least 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, Das Lied von der Erde, and 10 all end with some sort of embrace of the eternal at the end. And Das himmlische Leben as the sort of crowning of his early symphonic life, his early maturity, is one of the most personal and exquisite expressions of that vision of what eternity might be.
Mahler chooses to couch it in this incredibly, I think, unique way, at least for his time. It's the child. It's the child's perspective on what heaven would consist of. And it wouldn't be Mahler if he didn't have a child's version of what the opposite would consist of. And of course, he wrote a pendant very, very consciously here called the earthly life, das irdische Leben as well. And you've recorded this too, so let's just refresh our memories a little bit with some of those sounds. Let's listen to das irdische Leben, just a segment. Wonderful. That symbol, the gong that Mahler often uses as that last stroke of death. What was it like working with Stein's original instrumentation? I mean, you set yourself a little bit of a framework within which you had to work. Was that comfortable for you as an arranger?
I think I'm one of these people who finds, to the extent that I'm creative, the more specific the brief is, the more creative I feel. And I need deadlines, and I need some clarity. If someone just gives me a blank piece of paper, I'm at a bit of a loss. But also, I think the most important thing I ever heard about orchestration was from my friend, the composer Philip Sawyers, maybe 5-6 years ago. Someone was saluting him on his mastery of orchestration. And he said the key to being a great orchestrator is to write good notes. And if you start with good notes, the orchestration will be good. And so I find the most important thing for me as an orchestrator is to orchestrate really good pieces. And that tends to make me sound like a genius if you're dealing with music written by a genius.
Tell me a little bit about the musicians and the wonderful singer you have here.
The singer is April Frederick, who's an American-born soprano, and she is the affiliate artist of the English Symphony Orchestra. April's really a phenomenon. I encountered her first about 10 years ago. I was supposed to be doing a performance of Shostakovich's 14th Symphony with the Orchestra of the Swan. And a couple days before that concert, we were supposed to do a Britten choral work on the first half, and the chorus pulled out. I think they found the work too difficult or something. So at the very last minute, it was suggested that she sing Les Illuminations. And I said to my colleague, no one can sing those two pieces in one day, rehearsing in the British manner on the day of the concert. The vocal qualities required are too different. In fact, I don't think any one person should ever try to sing those two pieces in their same career. The sort of real powerhouse Vishnevskaya inspired Shostakovich and this delicate, very Francophile Britain. But she was magnificent, and we've since worked together on many projects. She's done world premiere recording of the Philip Sawyer's Songs of Loss and Regret with the ESO, which was a real high mark for the orchestra, and created the role of Jane Eyre in Jean Joubert's opera of the same name. ESO has been my orchestra since 2013. It was founded by William Boughton in the early 80s, and he really built it up into a major force for discovering lesser-known British music, particularly of the first half of the 20th century, first recordings of lots of Finzi and Delius, Bridge, Bax, Ireland, that sort of stuff. And also he was very canny at identifying significant later generation British composers who maybe were out of fashion. So he managed to have a long-standing partnership with Michael Tippett, Nicholas Maw, Lennox Barclay, all during their lifetimes. And so when I joined the orchestra, I thought that was a legacy worth building on. My predecessor was Vernon Handley, who had died in 2008, and then they'd gone through a period of trying to work with different guests before I joined. But I thought basically Bill Boughton had it more or less right. But then I wanted to bring to the mix of programming my own fascination with Mahler in particular, and the generation of composers after Mahler, particularly the sort of Entartete Musik generation of musicians who were influenced by Mahler and whose music was largely suppressed and lost in the decades after Mahler's death. It's a wonderful group of players, and we were just absolutely determined to get everyone back and playing together again after COVID as early as possible. We were the second or third orchestra in the UK to return to work. I think the London Mozart players beat us to it, but this was one of the very first things we did, and you can see lots of smiles in these performances. I think everyone was just overjoyed to be making music together again.
Yes, it's very noticeable in the takes that I was able to see. You know, this program consists not only of arrangements instrumentally, but also compositionally, which I think will raise some eyebrows. I think it's a fascinating example in our next segment here. We want to play just a little bit of the Forelle, like you've never really heard it before, I think. It kind of takes your breath away when you hear the quintet storming in after the vocal part there. What did you have in mind, and how are you getting away with this?
That's a good question. Well, we'll see if I get away with it. It was so much fun to do, and so much fun to record. So what we've done with the entire work is alternate verses of the original lead with the variations, and it was just a really fascinating challenge to knit the two together. Of course, there's all sorts of challenges with keys and stuff to be resolved, but it was just an absolute hoot to sort of think, you know, what can I take from the quintet that will really underpin or comment on the text of the song in a humorous way. And this is one of Schubert's most cleverly understated bits of musical satire, I think. You know, there's a lot of edge in Die Forelle. It's not just quaint and cute. And so I think we can draw out some of the subliminal messages that are in the song. And, you know, if I see Schubert in the afterlife and he's cross, I'll buy him a drink and just say it was.
I don't know.
Fun not to do.
I think we approach things sometimes way too sacrosanct. I think this is, you know, this is all part of enjoying, exploring, celebrating the music. I think I like these kinds of variations that I don't expect, and so I thought it was quite enjoyable. We're going to have to move along, but I wanted to just bring out an obvious parallel. You know, when Evan Stein did these arrangements, he did this out of a necessity. This was a performing society that was not going to be a full orchestra. You've done it out of necessity and from a very different angle. What is the future of music making if we're stuck with this for a while? How do you see this in the COVID world?
I can remember learning about these arrangements from the Society for Private Musical Performances in the 1990s, at which point they were very out of fashion. And I was amazed when I discovered them, how good they are. And so I think my first interest in them, and I've been doing them since then, I've recorded Schoenberg's arrangement of Das Lied von der Erde and the Lieder eines Freien Gesellen, is that they're just fascinating on their own merits. And hearing great music in different contexts is always fascinating. You hear different things. You know, when you hear Mahler's arrangement of the Death and the Maiden Quartet, you hear different things than in Schubert's original. It doesn't make it better, it just makes it different. And when you hear, say, the Ruchert leader on the piano versus the orchestra, you hear different things. In a piano work, you tend to hear more of the dissonance, more of the chromaticism, more of the harmony. Of course, you lose some of the sonority. In COVID, I thought, with lots of orchestras doing these sort of socially distanced things where everyone's in a box at home playing to a click track, I didn't think that was really worth pursuing for the orchestra. We have such limited resources, and I wanted whatever we do during COVID to be of lasting value. So we're trying not to duplicate programs other orchestras are doing. We're not going to be doing the 7,000th performance of the Lark Ascending this month. We're doing new arrangements, new works, working with our affiliated artists, and trying to think of, what are those dream projects we've been wanting to do for a while. And of course, in the virtual reality world, you can encourage people to take risks they might not do if they had to pay for a ticket and get a babysitter and park the car and everything. And so we're hoping that maybe people who like our Mahler stuff will be more inclined to try our Elgar stuff, and people who like our Elgar might come to one of our storytelling concerts, and families that have watched one of the storytelling concerts will come and watch this. And that by the end of this period, we'll have a slightly more open-minded, braver, curious audience, and a body of work that we can look back on and say, that was a good use of the time. And hopefully this is a step in the right direction.
I think it's fascinating. Most people have looked at Mahler as an impossible composer to perform in this period, but there are tremendous arrangements. You've shown us some examples here. There's a fully choral version of Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen. There are chamber versions. There are also arrangements of Mahler symphonies that some of them were done during his lifetime, including 2 piano and 4-hand versions of his symphonies. It would be wonderful perhaps to try to come up with a resource in which all of these Mahler arrangements could be looked up online. We're sort of thinking about doing that ourselves. So if there are is there any input about what Mahler is out there for chamber or smaller ensemble? That would be wonderful to have that as a resource. And
well, indeed, of course,
to be done.
Yeah, the existing resources tend to be driven by publishers who only want you to know about their own arrangements, but there is a lot out there. We're going to do the Klaus Simon arrangement of Mahler 9 later this year, which we're very excited about. But there is an absolute ton, and all of it has interest and merit, and not all of it is necessarily in this sound world of the Society for Private Musical Performances with the harmonium and piano. Ian Farrington, who's a well-known British arranger and orchestrator, has done most of the symphonies in a much more sort of classical orchestra style with no keyboards, and those are also fantastic arrangements and very, very effective.
Well, it's been fascinating to learn about this. I have one more question, because I know this is so important to what you do and what you think, and that is this. These pieces aren't chosen by accident. They're interwoven. You think of programming as more than these are my 4 pieces for the concert. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy of programming here as we wrap it up, because it's an interesting topic.
Well, I think always you feel like if you've got an audience's attention, you want them to first of all have a good musical experience, but also to come away from the experience enriched in some way. And Mahler is maybe the most interesting single figure I can think of in terms of sitting at the center of a nexus of visual art, history, music of the generations before him, his influence on musical development in the generations after him. And so in his case, it's a particularly rich world in which to work. And it's a great pity if the best you can do is just to stick the Grieg piano concerto on the first half alongside a Mahler symphony. Not that that's not a beautiful piece, but Mahler, especially now that he has a sort of built-in audience in many parts of the world, ought to be a conversation starter. And I think the philosophical essence of what the Mahler symphonies tell us is more relevant than ever. And so for instance, in Das himmlische Leben and Das irdische Leben, this is not about going to heaven and seeing a guy with a beard and people with wings on their backs. Hell, the earthly life, is a world, our world, of poverty, of pain, of dislocation, of children suffering. And heaven is the opposite. It's a world without cruelty and a world without need. And if we just, even come away from one concert reminded that we have it within our power to create this sort of das himmlische Leben that Mahler talks about, we don't have to wait to die. We could do it here, and why make a hell of our own creation when we can do the opposite?
Wonderful, wonderful. And very much, of course, in accord with what the foundation is trying to do as well. It's been wonderful having you as our guest today, Ken, and good luck with the project and what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.